Hey there, public employees. What if I told you that preparing for retirement has less to do with luck and more of knowing what punches to throw in retirement? Just like Rocky Balboa training for the next fight, knowing what you can and can't control is incredibly important to your retirement plan. My name is Seth Deal. I'm a CPA and financial advisor with Life Focus Financial Advisors. I'm also a former city employee, and I absolutely love helping public employees plan their financial futures. In this video, we're going to get into what are the specific factors we can and can't control in retirement. One of the biggest mistakes I see folks make when planning for retirement or as they get closer to retirement is just letting retirement happen to them. It's so incredibly important to have a plan in place and really focus on those factors that we can control and do our best to mitigate those factors that we can't control. You really want to focus specifically on what you can control as you're preparing for retirement and really maximize how you're preparing for retirement. There could be drastic consequences for not preparing for retirement. You could ultimately not have enough saved. Your pension is potentially not enough to support you in retirement. And due to your lack of other savings, you could go back in later years to work. And trust me, no one wants to return to work in their later years. You really need to seize your retirement planning and really focus on the key things you can control and you can't control. There are three components of planning for retirement that we're going to go over today that you can control, and there are four that you have limited control over. Let's go ahead and start with those factors that we can control. Let's start with our savings rate. You can think of your savings rate as your punch count. It's incredibly important to have additional savings beyond your retirement pension. So you get closer to your retirement date, you want to make sure you're maxing out your deferred compensation plan if at all possible. And you also want to maximize your other savings beyond your deferred comp. A couple ways you can do that is to contribute to a Roth account. If your income is too high to contribute directly to a Roth account, there is a backdoor Roth process. However, there are a few steps to that. We're not going to get into that today, but that is an option you can look into. You also want to contribute to a taxable brokerage account. Having these three different savings, your deferred comp, a Roth bucket, and a taxable bucket, is going to give you an incredible amount of flexibility in retirement. Another factor that you can control as you're preparing for retirement is how long you actually work. Based on your pension formula, each year you work, you're going to get a slightly larger pension amount. So it's incredibly important to think about, based on our situation, does it make sense to work another year, or do we potentially want to work some overtime to bump up our pension amount in retirement? And is there anything on our mind that we really want to do in retirement that's time sensitive? So each person's situation is going to be different in terms of how long you actually end up working, but you do want to factor in how long you are going to work. Then you have your lifestyle choices. You can think of lifestyle choices as kind of your fighting style. You want to think about, what are my expenses that I have to pay? What are the things that are non-negotiable? There are going to be a handful of those expenses: taxes, healthcare, basic living needs, housing. If you have a mortgage, those are all expenses that we have to pay. But then we want to think about, what are those expenses that we potentially could cut or reduce on if needed. Those could be, let's say, eating out, or where you're eating out, the amount of travel you do, and a number of other expenses that we all have on a day-to-day basis. Now that we've talked about those factors that we can control in retirement, what can't we control? Well, first, market returns. I certainly don't know what the market's going to do in the short term, and based on historical returns, we can have an idea of what the markets are going to do. However, in the short term, markets are incredibly unpredictable, incredibly volatile. And so we want to understand that that is a factor we can't control, and we want to mitigate it to the best of our abilities by really focusing on where we put our money. We want to make sure we have a war chest of cash and bonds to pull from to prevent potentially taking large losses due to market volatility on our investments. The next planning area that we can't control is inflation. You can think of inflation as that gradual fatigue as you get into the later rounds of a boxing match. Even though we can't control inflation and we don't necessarily know exactly what inflation is going to do, we can't protect ourselves from inflation by ensuring our investments are positioned in a way to combat inflation. We want to make sure we have enough growth-oriented investments, equity or stock investments in our portfolio to provide a sufficient hedge against inflation. We also don't know how long retirement's going to last. We don't know how long you're going to live. And no one likes to think about how long they're going to live. But we want to be prepared for you to live a long, healthy retirement when we also want to ensure that you don't outlive your savings. So again, we want to make sure we have enough growth-oriented investments in our portfolio to protect us from potentially outliving our investment. Finally, we have healthcare costs and taxes to some extent that we can't control. These can be real heavy hitters on the expense side in terms of what we experience in retirement. On the healthcare side, we want to make sure we're protected from rising healthcare costs as well as potentially having any unexpected healthcare costs in retirement. We can do tax planning to reduce our lifetime tax bill. However, at the end of the day, Congress likes to make changes to the tax code, and we want to be prepared for that unknown. However, we do want to plan for both of these areas, and even though we can't control them, we can do our best to plan for them so we're not taken by surprise. On that planning note, I've put together a number of different mistakes I see public employees in Washington making and how to combat those different mistakes. You can download that guide in the description below. As we go through and prepare for retirement, it's so incredibly important that we have a plan in place and we're focusing on those factors we can control, and then we're thinking about those factors that we can't control and how do we mitigate against any risk of those factors taking us by surprise. Thanks for tuning in. If you ever want to learn more about working together, please visit lifefocusadvisors.com. Thanks.